My name's Anthony and this is my electric Quantum 2+2. I originally bought the car in the late 80s and used it as my everyday car. And then inevitably over time I bought a mainstream car, and this became my second car, which I use mainly in the summer, of course. When I got married, my wife had a convertible Mini, and so this car really didn't have a reason to exist anymore. So I decided to convert it to an electric car to make it more eco, and to do it as a project with the children at my school. There's a story about this car, that it was built as a demonstrator by Quantum originally, sent to India, and then, because it was one of the few that actually has a Mark IV Fiesta Dash, and after its return from India it was sold to somebody who then had to finish it off. Unfortunately they died, and I bought the car in a sort of 90% finished state. And as I said, you then used it for many years as it was. I teach design technology, and we have a rather nice workshops at the school, and the headmaster is always looking for beacon projects, of course, for the children to enjoy, and also for parents to be impressed when they walk past. So I had this idea to take this car that I owned and convert it at my expense, but with the school's premises and with the children's help, to show them what their future was going to look like. They all thought I was crazy converting a perfectly good car into an electric car. They thought it was going backwards, but of course in time they will realise I was moving forwards. They did a lot of the mechanical stuff. A lot of the renovation of the car was done by them, and some of the putting it back together again. But the electronic side of things I left to experts and myself to do, because obviously you want the car to be reliable. Yeah, the car fundamentally is much the same as it was. Externally it's the same, it just had a respray. When we were rebuilding the car, we thought we may as well replace the shocks and the springs and the hoses and washers and things like that, of course, as well as a new balloon. But the subframe in here didn't need to be altered, because of course there's no engine anymore, so all the mountings of those could be removed, and instead I welded on some mounts for the electric motor and a platform above the gearbox and motor combination for half the batteries to be on here. The other half is actually in the back. Behind the back seat there's a gap which takes the other half of the battery pack, and then I galvanised the subframe as well to make the car last forever, hopefully. Yes, I had to have that made because it was quite precise work. The adapter plate is aluminium, about an inch thick of aluminium that fits between the gearbox and the motor, and just connects them to each other. I decided to keep the clutch and gearbox when I did this, because I had no idea what gear the car needed to be in, because nobody's done one of these conversions before. And I'm very glad I did keep it, because occasionally I do need to go down into, most of the time I drive it in second gear, but occasionally on a very steep hill I will need to drop it into first gear, and the top speed is about 60 miles an hour in second gear, so occasionally I do pop it into third if I'm on the A3 or whatever.
Fantastic!
And on a very steep hill I can put it in reverse and then flip the reverse switch into forward, and then the car can go up a very, very steep hill even though it's in two lots of reverse. I rarely try and push it to the limits, but I get about 50 miles out of it generally, which means I can get to work and back twice before I recharge it, and then when I do I try and use the solar panels to recharge it.
So it's effective. They say most people's commute is 10 to 20 miles, so it would be suffice for most people in reality anyway.
Certainly for most people, yeah, and definitely as a second car. If you've got a mainstream car for the long distances, and then this can be used for the shorter local distances. Yes, it was a little bit of a struggle to get the paperwork through. I sent the paperwork off and told them the car was now silver and that it was electric. And I got the paperwork back saying, okay, you've got a silver car now, but it's still petrol. And I sent them. I had to send the photographs and descriptions through again. And eventually, my forms now say that the car is electric, and so I have no road tax to pay. I get a
Fantastic.
form back every year saying, you owe us £0 and 0 pence. I still have to do it, but it doesn't cost me. You just have to show evidence that it is now electric. So I show them all the photographs, and eventually that got through to them.
Talk me through the more technical aspects of it, because to the layman who doesn't know how an electric car works, it's not simply a case of the power comes from the battery straight to the motor. There's obviously controls involved and a lot of electronics to make it smooth. For example, I presume there's a unique throttle pedal assembly of some sort to make it work. What's the sort of, from the battery to the motor, what's the sort of additions that you've had to fit to make it actually operate?
I bought a kit from a company that does electric conversions, and they supplied me with all the bits and pieces and gave me an enormous amount of help to fit the kit into the car. There's a box of electronics which is at the front in the place where the radiator used to be, and in there is a big computer that controls everything. It has some massive cables coming into it from the battery pack, and then the throttle pedal is just connected to a traditional solenoid, and so the more electricity goes through that, the faster the speed is. And then there's various relays and contactors, contact breakers. There's also an accident sensor in there, so if the car does suddenly stop, it will break the high voltage feed and make the car safer. Not that the voltage is going to kill you in this car, but obviously it is quite a high voltage.
Yeah.
Apart from that, it's just boxes and wires, and of course the battery management system, which is optional, but it helps to keep. There's 32 cells in this car, so it helps to keep the levels
Balanced
more or
out,
less the same,
yeah.
because if they're not, then you can get problems. I was told the batteries themselves didn't need cooling. Of course, the ones at the front here generally get quite a lot of air around them, and there are these vents from when there was a petrol engine there, so the front's okay anyway. The back, of course, potentially could get hotter because it's between the back seat and the boot, but I was told it wasn't really an issue. Of course, the motor is exposed, and so that cools down, but and the computer itself is mounted on a 1-inch aluminium plate to cool it. In the end, though, after a few months of running it, we did retrofit a cooling system for the computer, because it did appear to be getting a bit too cold at times.
Did you have some sort of regeneration system fitted, and is it adjustable as it is on some cars, or was that sort of taking it into a different sort of realm?
One of the requirements that I had was that I wanted to be able to have regen, because it seems silly to not have it. And that was one of the reasons I went with AC, because apparently it's a lot easier to fit, or it comes to standard with AC, whereas with DC it's a bolt-on, and so it does have regen. The pack, the Curtis system, does have an option to increase or decrease it to one's preference. I've got it set in a sort of middle setting, because there are technical and electronic reasons for not setting it too high, apparently, on this particular kit.
With the benefit of hindsight, okay, with the experience of having done this, I know you did it as a project, as much because of the challenge as a requirement, but is it something you would ever tackle again? And if you did, what would you do differently?
Originally I set out just to replace the engine and do not much more, but like when you do have an old house, you start taking things apart and you find more problems, and so in the end it was a case of completely strip the car back to the body and start all over again, which was not something I had planned to do. I also got a bit carried away with trying to fit modern conveniences, so I put in electric seats from an Audi TT, electric mirrors here, a heated windscreen, which was quite difficult to find for a Mark II Fiesta, but I did get one.
You got what? I want to know how you got that, because I want one for my Quantum.
I'll give you the name of the website.
I will have that.
I was one of 5 that were ordered that week.
I've actually got to order. I've got to order one for my Quantum.
Yeah, no, I can let you have that. I fitted a fancy radio, and I tried to put in as many modern conveniences as possible. So the electrics on the car and the engine are quite complicated. So I would advise people not to get too carried away. If it's a second car and you're just using it for a bit of fun, you don't need to have all the conveniences of an everyday car, because it does complicate things immensely.
As someone who's about to redo the interior of my car, I'm going to do all that anyway. Kit car builders just can't do the basics, you know that.
I forgot to tell you, it's also got parking sensors on the back with a camera.
Right.
So that is quite handy when you're reversing.
Yes.
It's got sensors on the front as well. Because it's fiberglass, you can put the sensors behind the fiberglass and you don't have to drill holes in the bumper.
Really?
Yes.
It works through?
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
And what else have I done to soup it up? I put in this.
Yeah.
That's not electronic, of course, but that's out of a Mini. It's converted from a Mini with just made slightly wider at the sides to fit into the Quantum. Well, because I work in a school and of course I drive around in stealth mode, the car is totally silent. I did fit a horn that sounds like sheep, goats and hens, just to make the kids laugh.
How did that go down with some of the teachers who weren't expecting it though?
I don't do it with the teachers.